All right. I believe we are on. Cool. All right. Well, excellent. All right. Well, hang on. Let me just, yep. I think we're on. Are we on? Someone who's in the chat, tell us. Thing's always weird. This is how every episode starts. I always don't know if it's working. So once I did half an episode without any sound for some reason. So, all right, well, we'll get started. It looks like it's working. So cool. All right. Well, today, thanks everyone for joining. Today we have some guests, as I promised for those watching last time or the time before. So yeah, today we're gonna talk about a really cool new tool that was developed by FinancialForce called the Apex Log Analyzer. And I have two guests, and I will let them introduce themselves. So Kevin, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Kevin Jones. I'm a senior architect at FinancialForce. I typically work kind of with the research team there, but also with the product teams. So I kind of have a broad reach. The tool that we're going to look at actually came from one of the developers in the research group, and we kind of repackaged it into VS Code. It was a standalone tool. So we do a little bit of tooling as well.
Awesome. And
Hi, everyone.
Stephanie.
I'm Stephanie Maddox. I'm a product manager for platform dev tools here at Salesforce. I own the extensions for VS Code along with LWC local dev and the Apex debuggers. So I think we should just get right to it and get to a demo, and then we can see what questions people have and talk more about it. I think the tool will be pretty self-explanatory as we go through. As Nate mentioned, this is all about helping you parse Apex debug logs and find issues. So Kevin, what do you say? Let's just dive right into the demo.
Cool. Yep. Let me just share my screen and we'll go and have a look. Hopefully that's good for everybody, size-wise. So obviously this is a VS Code plugin. You can check you've got it installed. If you go and download it from the marketplace, you'll see Apex Log Analyzer is what you're looking for. Just go to the marketplace and it guides you how to install it. Once you've got it installed, really it doesn't do anything unless you've got a debug log. So your first little challenge is go and find a useful debug log. And I happen to have a favorite that I use for all demos. So this is my demo debug log. You can either load the debug log, from your project, which is what I've done here. So I've got it saved inside my little workspace. Or there is an option to download it from an org. So if you connect it to an org, you can download it and view it that way. This one just happens to be local. So I can just go on here and there's a little command here. Equivalently, you've got one over here actually to show the log analyzer. So let me just get rid of that. So this is the initial view. What I'll do is I'll just kind of walk you through the various bits first, and then we can kind of talk about what you can see. So there's a kind of important bit right at the top here I just want to point out. So obviously when you've got a debug log, sometimes it can have the execution might have terminated due to an exception, or the log might get truncated, and these are things you really want to know quite early on before you start analyzing. If you start analyzing and then work out the log's been truncated, it can give you a kind of misleading picture. So we put this little ready status up here. You'll see error messages appear up there if there's anything wrong with the log. So kind of the first thing really to do is to check this and just make sure you're good. It's also worth just having a look at what the settings were when the log was made. We generally recommend that you use fine or above for Apex. If you're using something less than fine, you're going to find there's holes in the log. It's not going to give you as good information. So these two things are kind of pretty important to have a look at straight out. In terms of what you get, essentially there's 4 tabs which represent different views on the log, and they're giving you slightly different information. So which ones you want to use kind of depends on what you're doing. So I'll try and explain a little bit about the ones we use. I mean, it depends on your use case as to which is most important. The timeline one here, it generally gets used really, I think, for kind of initial overall views of what's happening. So I probably use it more often on customer cases where the log is coming off a customer org, and I want to get a very quick understanding of what's happening. Often because I don't really understand the code or what might be executing here. So it's a good way of kind of getting an overall sense rather than getting details. Some of the other tabs are better for details. Now, as you can see, it's all nicely colored. There's been a lot of debate about the colors, whether we got them right or wrong. If you hate them, please create a PR. We will gladly change them or put an option on. But we just color them basically on these types that you can see down at the bottom. So the bottom one, this light green, is a code unit start. And these appear kind of around big areas. So you'll see there's another one up here, which we'll get to. This particular log is for a batch execution. So it could have run for about 60 seconds, but looking at it, probably a bit too small to see. I think it's about 6.5 it ran, so it wasn't very long. What we actually were interested in this one was working out why it was running slowly. This was a customer kind of case. And I've been through this a few times, so it's fairly easy for me to kind of spot what's going on here. But I'll just take you up to here, this dark line. So essentially we're reading from left to right, obviously in timeline terms. And as you go up, you're going through the call stack. And at this point in the call stack, we've got a DML operation that's happening. And we can see underneath here that there's a trigger. And this trigger, I happen to know, is not ours. It's not got our namespace prefix on. So this is a customer trigger on one of our objects, and we're performing some operation. And that trigger's taking quite a chunk of this execution time. At this point, I already know what the problem is, which is, there's been some custom development on the org, and that's interfering with how our product's working. I've got my first level answer. Usually what we find is we also like to get to the second level answer, which is, why is this being slow? Triggers aren't naturally slow things. So you can carry on, and we often do. So if I run up here a little bit, we'll see this function here is taking a large chunk of time. And you see that it's got something to do with custom metadata loading, basically. So I don't really understand what this is. It's custom code, but at least I can give you an insight that actually this trigger is taking a long time because of something to do with some custom metadata manipulation. And that's really, from a customer point of view, all I really want to get out of this is I understand the first level of problem, and I can go on and talk about the second level. So that's really this view. Obviously, you can use this when you're doing development as well, but normally in development, if this was all your code, you'd pretty much know what was going on anyway. It's sometimes useful if you're picking up code from other developers, I find, so I'll go and have a look at this, and it'll give me a sense of, what order the DML operations are, whether there are any loops in there, and, I can go into a lot more detail. So that's that tab. I've just turned off this shrink to fit accidentally, but it's a good thing to do. If you have this on, it collapses everything into your viewport. Sometimes that's a little too detailed. So turn that off, and you can just scroll along, and it makes it a little easier to read what's happening. Nice and easy. Okay, so let's have a look at call tree. Now, call tree is a little bit more like what you might traditionally expect from a log analyzer. Essentially, you can kind of go through and expand all of the functions out and see who's calling who. You can actually link from the timeline, which is quite funky and fun. So if I just try that, if I just click on there, it'll take you nicely right into the right place in the call log, and you can just see the context of where you are. So they're kind of connected together. You'll notice on here that we've also got links set up on all of these. So there's also a feature where if you've got the right project open, if I had the source code for what was being analyzed, if I click on there, it would actually take me to the source file as well. So you can kind of drill the next level and actually go and have a look at the code for real if it's your code, obviously, and it's loaded into the project. In this project, it's an empty one, so I won't try and kind of click through, but you can run through those. There's a little bit of control here, obviously expand and collapse, and we can get rid of a couple of things that frequently appear in logs if they're getting in your way. Next tab we've got is analysis. You'll probably have seen this on profilers. This is really giving you the tabular version, which is generally used a bit more internally where we're doing actual performance work. So if you're profiling something, you really want to be keeping a close eye on where the expense is. This one actually tells us pretty much straight at the top, this is the function we were looking at previously. This was the most expensive function in this log. But obviously there's a lot more detail in here. We can look at the counts and the total versus the net duration. So this is the difference between, what time the function spent versus what time the function and all of the sub-functions spent. So you can kind of look at it that way. There is a bit of sorting up here, so we can sort it by count if we're really interested in that. See which was the most common thing that we ran, which is unit of work, which is not surprising in some FinancialForce code. So you can get a pretty good sense and also, kind of capture the details. I think sometimes what we're very interested in is one function. So, you can kind of capture the time, make changes, and come back and have a look and see what it actually did, see what your changes, what the impact was. Obviously, down at the bottom here, we've got totals as well, which gives you some sense of, how long the whole thing was taken if you want to have a look at that. And the last tab we have really just calls out what's happening with your database statements. So we've got them split between DML and SOCL. And all this is doing is pulling out the queries and the DML that you've run during the execution. Sometimes this is useful as a summary as well. Sometimes just understanding the DML, the database operations, is all you need to know about an execution. But also we use it just to make sure that we're not, querying things unnecessarily. We're not going to get near our SOCL 101 limits. So this is a good place to come and check and just make sure that there's nothing unusual happening in the code. But it just gives you a slightly different view. There is some kind of limitations on the information that we can get here. You'll see that sometimes we can tell you what object it is and sometimes we can't, and that's a bit awkward. And there is a request actually for us to tie this back, so we'll probably put a link on here which will take you to the code at some point, but at the moment you can't tell exactly where in the code this query was taken from. But it's a tab that we're kind of still working on a little bit, I think. And that's your very quick run through of the log analyzer.
Awesome. This is great. And I mean, this has been a feature that we wanted to build for a very long time, at least, I don't know, years probably. And yeah, it's awesome that you all have been able to do this. It's all open source and, kind of working together to ship such a cool feature. So yeah, awesome. Well, if anyone has any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, I'm curious. You mentioned that this thing about ready at the top, like you said, if the log is truncated or whatever, like what are some reasons why why that would be, like an error would happen, right?
Yeah, so any kind of exception that causes the execution to terminate, an uncatchable exception, say a CPU timeout or a SOCL 101 error, you'll see those, they'll get shown at the top. I think the truncation generally happens where you've got too fine a log level on and you've got a long execution. So if you're doing, you're doing async and you've got your 60 seconds and that's going to create a really big log, and it's quite easy to kind of overrun the limit, really. So yeah, I think what you don't realize sometimes is that the log's being truncated. The truncation can happen in a point that you'd be really interested in. So generally what we view is that truncated logs, we try not to analyze them, really. We'll always try and go back, adjust the logging level, try and make sure the log fits, and then try and extract information just so you don't get misled by what's going on, really. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's obviously always the a long-standing problem of these various truncations and things. So hopefully not something people run into too often anymore on a regular basis, because we've increased the size. Actually, I'd be curious to is this something that happens quite a lot still, or it's kind of at a manageable point now that the size limit truncations anyway don't happen too often unless you're doing something real crazy. Yeah, I think if you went back to the old limits, then yeah, we probably wouldn't have put so much effort into this. Almost, it's kind of like now we've got the larger limit, we can really spend time on it. You'll still see truncations every now and again, but they are much rarer, and they're virtually always manageable in my experience. It's all about getting the logging level right. So typically, there are tricks people can play. Obviously, if you're not interested in some of the other categories of logging, just turn them all down. Turn everything off, essentially. What as a developer, what I'm often most interested in is just getting the Apex logging. I'm just, anything else that, like the profile logging, it's kind of, well, it's interesting, but it isn't really what I want, So I think when we're dealing with customers, we will quite often, be quite directive about what it is that we are after and how to get that, down to specifying what the log is. There are other tricks you can play, of course, which is, try to make sure that you're only logging the bit that you're interested in. often we see people maybe turn login on indiscriminately, and obviously there are ways of controlling logs down to smaller scope sizes. It just takes a little bit more energy to get the log right. But the advantage is that having the right log is probably half of the battle. I think once you've got the right log, then the analysis becomes so much easier. So we're almost at that point where we kind of say, well, if the log's wrong, we'll just go back and do it until we get it right, and then better off from there, I think.
Makes sense. Cool. And I assume truncations that happen on like collections, these like, we only show like, certain amounts in the collections and stuff. I assume those don't really impact this, this tool here, right?
No, I don't think they have any impact directly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, because I know obviously in the replay debugger, that can sometimes be a problem because you can only see like the first, handful of items in a collection or something, and then the rest are just sort of truncated. But in this, I guess that's good to know that's not. I mean, you still know the size of the collection and how long it took to do the operations and whatnot on it.
Yeah, I think sometimes what we'll do is obviously go back over and put the extra debugger into the code. If you're kind of missing information that you really desperately need, but most times you can kind of infer it at this level, or what's really going on. And obviously the log's still there. You can go back to the log and pull whatever direct. So really, what's happening with the log analyzer is obviously we parse the log and extract various bits of information in order to present the output, but there's lots of information in the log that we don't extract, so the log is still very useful. So sometimes it's a matter of using the analyzer to locate the right region in the log. That's usually your difficulty. The logs are so big. Locate the right region and then go back to the log, and then it's like, oh, now I can get more detail out. I can look at what the debug statements were saying around that area. So
gotcha.
I do think they work in, sometimes as a developer, they work in kind of harmony almost. It's kind of, okay, you can get this extra view of what's in there, but then you still want to go back to the log to get the fine detail that's not visible.
It always amazes me how some of the skill people have of just looking through those logs and finding things. I will admit I'm not, we work on the tools, but I am by no means an Apex developer expert. And so tools like this are and the replay debugger are super helpful to me. I often, when I pull up a log, it's like, I don't really know what's happening here. But fortunately I can ask Chris Peterson and he'll help me. But not everyone has that luxury, I think.
I think that's a very common experience.
Well, actually, it's true. He's on Twitter. Everyone can ask him, really. You just post your question and he'll usually get back to you. So
yeah, I'll
try that. I'll tell him you sent me, Nate.
There's a couple questions. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Sorry, I was just going to say, you talked about going back to the log, and I think the name of the log up in the upper left lets you go right back into the log detail if you want, right?
Yeah, that's a useful point, actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Now, that would have been easy because the log is open next to it. But when you download the log, it's stored in the .sfdx directory. So in order to get back to the log, if you've downloaded it, you need to know, click on that and it'll just take you to the log.
Interesting. We have is this a custom editor? How do you now that I realize you showed the demo, how did you start this? I missed that, or I think you showed it, but I forgot.
So there's just a little piece on there. So it's a command essentially.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yep. Yeah, okay. And is it on the log actually too, on the file?
Yeah, you've got it.
Okay,
you've got one
cool.
On either. Yeah.
Good. Yep.
And if you go onto the command palette, log : maybe. Right. Yeah. This is
load Apex log for analysis. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's the one you want.
Good.
Yeah, there's two of them. One of them opens the analysis. This load one is, actually, I'll just do it and you'll see. It's going to go off to my org. Oh, it's got upset because I haven't set my org up. Okay. Oh,
so that one actually pulls up the logs in the org. And then you can kind of download it and open it in one. That's cool. Yeah, that makes it easy.
But if you go through that route, of course, the log file ends up in the .sfdx directory. So sometimes you're kind of like, well, where did that log go?
Yeah,
I can see the analysis. I can't see the log. So you click the link and it'll show you the log.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. If it's something we should change, like, do people expect I actually sort of find that to maybe be a little weird. The SFDX directory is kind of something that we sort of say like, hey, don't go in there. Like that's for system stuff. But then we do put the logs there by default. I almost wonder if we should change that behavior and have a logs folder that is set to get ignored by default where they end up, right?
Yeah, I think that could be useful if you, I guess it depends a little bit on how often you use logs, doesn't it? For me, yeah, having to dig them out of SFDX is sometimes a bit weird.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if they were there and you could just find them a bit easier.
Yeah.
I think there's another one that's kind of related, although this is probably a bit longer term, is, the extension .log is probably, a little generic in VS Code. Obviously, extensions are kind of pretty central to understanding what's the content are. It's the old Windows. The extension tells you what it is, and log is fairly generic, isn't it? I think
that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's definitely a lot of nice things we could do. I mean, I could even imagine a custom tab, where you can open, in VS Code, and it actually displays all your logs without necessarily having to download them all, and then you could obviously open the analyzer from there. So lots of cool stuff we could do. We got a couple questions. Let's see. So how do we know the dark line is taking more time? I think the color isn't the indicator of time; it's the length, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yep.
So time is always proportional to length on that flame graph.
Yeah, scroll down again. Actually, we should scroll down just so we can see the color code again.
Alrighty, you should be.
Or maybe it's just not showing on my.
Yeah.
There. Okay. There we go. I guess my Zoom controls are covering it. So yeah, the color is telling it what type of what type of log line I guess it is, or what's happening, whether it's code or SOCL or whatever, and the length is the time. Cool. The tool looks great. But to what extent will it be useful to someone who is a little new to development? I mean, how can we get the best of it? Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of what I was, so the question is sort of for someone who's new to Apex, like how can we get the most use out of this, and how is it useful? And I mean, I think kind of this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, like, looking through a debug log for those of us who aren't, super hardcore Apex experts can be a little daunting. And I think this is a really nice way to visualize problems like as you were seeing here. I mean, I think this is the thing you mentioned about the trigger is a super common thing for ISVs like you, or even larger teams, right? If you're working on a team that has a bunch of developers and your stuff was working fine, and then all of a sudden it stopped working, maybe the debug log will help you find, similar to you showed there, like, hey, there's this trigger here that's now taking a really long time. And I think this analyzer helps you find those problems a lot easier than if you just had to actually parse the log yourself, right?
Oh yeah, I think it's about accelerating that time to understanding, isn't it? But I think back to the kind of question, there is still quite a gap in my head between this level of analysis that's kind of useful in some scenarios, and perhaps the more detailed profile stuff that you might get with some other tooling. And I guess the way I'd kind of put it is this is very much a homegrown tool. It's something that one of our developers built because they needed it. It's actually the third generation of logging tools I think that we've built. So this kind of incremental thing where we're just building tools that kind of serve our purpose. But I think there's quite a lot of extras out there that could be done. There's a lot of information in a log, and trying to find ways to make that more approachable for people, I think is, something either we can do inside this tool or we can do alternatives to. I don't think it's not the kind of be all and end all. It's just a much simpler way than what we had before. That's kind of how I think about it.
What do you use some other? You said other tools. Do you use other? Are there some other tools that you use, or are they internal tools, or?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but I'll give you the very short version. So the first version of this was a CLI tool that you ran off the command line, written in Java. The second version was a Java graphical tool. The third was a standalone web server, which essentially is very similar to this, and this is like that encompassed. So every generation has replaced the previous one, essentially.
Gotcha.
And this is kind of the pinnacle of where we are at the moment, but it is very much built around what FinancialForce developers want. And I'm sure there are a lot of other requirements out there, which is kind of part of the reason we thought it'd be really good in open source, is people can come along, and if this is close enough to what they want, we'll happily extend it, or, look at perhaps adding some new tabs on there, or looking at things different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've actually been talking about this for a long time. We even have some tools internal to Salesforce that are similar to this. And I know Stephanie's been sort of chatting with those teams, to try to, coalesce around this tool, right? Like, we, and I'm sure other companies have the same, like, it kind of doesn't make sense for us to have 3 different teams at Salesforce building internal tools for this, and then you building something, and then, another company building something. So yeah, I really hope that we can get both some of our internal teams that are working on these problems to start contributing to this. And then, hopefully people in the community that are interested in this, would either contribute or at least open bugs to let people know what features they want, right?
Yeah, and certainly that was one of the most interesting parts about opening sourcing, is just to see what people really want. I'm sure there's quite a lot of smart ideas out there, but when you work in one environment, you are kind of limited by what you need, and it'd be interesting to see what other people come up with.
Yeah, for sure. A couple more questions. Would be nice to be able to turn off all the entering managed package. It takes 90% of my logs. Yeah. That's a feature request, I guess, from me for Stephanie. I mean, I will admit the logs thing is probably, I don't know if it's as frustrating to me as it is to everyone else, but it's unfortunately like a lot of it's been around forever. It's one of those legacy things. It's very complicated, and changing it is often very difficult. And, we have to be careful not to break things and stuff. So, some of these things are, I mean, to be honest, mostly, the reason we've increased the storage limits is because anytime we've looked at, say, okay, can we do X to make the logs better or decrease the size or whatever, it ends up being so expensive to build that we just say, we're just going to basically give away more storage, right? So like, and that's, to be honest, that's how we've solved the problem. Like, I have asked people periodically, like, are the current limits, and that I was kind of alluding to that earlier, like, are the current limits enough? Based on our analysis, I think, I can't remember, but we have we increased the limits to get something like 99.9% of logs are not truncated. But the thing is, though, oftentimes, what I sort of feel like sometimes is often those ones that 0.1% or whatever is the ones that you need to debug, right? So we've often talked about increasing the limits even more if possible. So that's definitely something I'm curious to learn about, and to hear what people's thoughts are.
Yeah, I think to this person's question as well on the entering managed package, perhaps a PR to further filter your view in the log analyzer, even though that content's still in the log. Maybe that's another thing that people would like to filter out of the call tree, so that that's person
true.
Who asked, you could think about a PR as well. If it's like, I really want another filter here, this is driving me nuts, it's just noise, I don't want to look at it. Something to consider there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. I suppose if the log isn't getting truncated, then it's not really an issue. It's mostly just an annoyance. So yeah, you could filter it out in the UI. Getting a nice GUI for turning on and off logging. Yeah. I do think having like there probably is a feature, a set of features we could do to really make logging, the management of logging in VS Code better, having a custom tab where you can browse your logs, or you can change the level and all that stuff. Right now it's basically just a couple commands, but they can be, I forget what SFDX enable logging for replay debugger or something, right? You got to remember all of those things. So yeah, definitely some stuff we could do there. Would be nice to have possibility to set custom colors on the timeline. Yeah, I would actually, I was thinking the same thing. They're in, this is probably a good, a good pull request. You actually can, I think fairly new to VS Code, they actually added that in these web views, they actually now pass theme variables for colors. So you actually could, I don't know if you've explored this, but you actually should be able to make this themable. Maybe it is already.
I'm going to try and see. It should work, but we'll see. Theme texts. Which one are we on? So light. There you go. It is all light.
It is themeable. Okay, very nice. Very nice.
Yeah,
excellent.
So it's themable. It pulls in the CSS from VS Code. What it doesn't do, of course, as you can see, is we don't change the colors on the graph. So the colors were kind of picked so that they worked well on both sides. But there was this conversation I think I had with Stephanie about what would be really nice is probably a high contrast option. Because obviously some people will find these colors difficult. What I do is I don't use the colors. I navigate by the tooltips, as you probably can tell, as you wander around. So the colors are kind of a bit inconsequential, but I think a high contrast theme would be nice.
Yeah, this actually, I mean, this maybe is something that we could have, we've got some, a lot of themes and guidance and whatnot on high contrast. Maybe this is something we can have one of our designers, look up a few different color options that are going to be accessible and whatnot, and then we can send a pull request over to you.
Yeah, I think it was quite an interesting little side subject. I had not really looked into this, so I went and did a bit of research about what was most accessible, and what you quite quickly work out is what's most accessible and what's aesthetically pleasing are actually slightly odds with each other. So you kind of have to support both, really. If you look at flame graphs in general, are usually relatively uniform in color. Not usually green; they're usually red and orange. That's the fairly typical kind of flame graph model. But I do think high contrast is would be a nice add-on.
For sure. Or I mean, you could make it, I guess you could probably expose them as settings too, depending on how, I don't know how crazy people want to get in terms of being able to customize this, but that's definitely something we should look into. I mean, definitely we should at least, absolutely, we should support the accessibility to have high contrast, but I'm sure as with everything like this, you probably spent more time arguing about the colors than you did about any other feature in this, I assume, right? That's how it always goes.
What's slightly annoying is I'm responsible for the colors, but the original author had a high contrast and he hates my colors. So we're at odds internally about the colors.
Very nice. Very nice. Well,
a bit of debt there.
Maybe I'll send a pull request every now and again. I do that to the team's dismay. They as any engineer doesn't want the PM to send pull requests, but I'm dangerous enough that I can write code and do that. So every now and again I get a feature in there. So maybe I'll find some time and send you a pull request for that.
It's really easy to do, honest, Nate.
Get
on with it. Not a problem.
Very good. All right. Well, this is awesome. I love. I mean, like I said, this is something that we can probably. Have you actually closed the issue, Stephanie? I thought there was an issue that I opened like 3 years ago to say we should make a thing like this. So we should close it. And actually, this isn't in the extension pack, which is worth noting. We actually do. I forgot we didn't. We should add this to our extended extension pack also. And I actually did also. I don't know if it's in. I did send a pull request to add this to the recommended extensions on a new project. So when you do SFDX create new project, there's like a VS Code settings, like in that .VS Code folder, there's an extensions.